People are not afraid to say settler colonialism anymore. People are not afraid to call it as it is. And I truly also believe that the brutality of the Israeli army, the brutality of the police has shown the true face of Israel. The case of Sheikh Jarrah is one that is very important. It is a neighborhood where the remaining few Palestinian families are surrounded by Israeli settlers, and they are being forcibly evicted from their homes at gunpoint. So the Israeli court is really just paving the way for settlers to take over these homes. These Palestinian families are being driven out. What is happening in Sheikh Jarrah should not be separated from what happened in 1948. And let us recall the argument that the Israeli government and pro-Israeli lobby often uses about 1948 and the mass displacement of Palestinians. Well, they just fled. They fled their homes. Sheikh Jarrah today shows us how they are driven out, how they are suffocated into leaving these homes, not by choice, but by imposition, by an imposition of a military army. The struggle in Sheikh Jarrah did not begin this week. It did not begin last week. It has been ongoing for years. For years, these settlers have been trying to kick Palestinians out of their homes. Hamad al-Kurd, who we have seen on social media, along with his sister, Muna al-Kurd, they recollect the struggle of their grandmother, Rifqa, who died at the age of 103, older than the state of Israel. And yet somehow these settlers tried to drive her out of her home that has been there for generations. This is a struggle that goes beyond Hamad al-Kurd, beyond his years. It is much older than him. The Israeli and pro-Israeli narrative that tries to sugarcoat the colonialist practices happening here as conflict and now a real estate issue is the same language we have seen from the Israeli government, where they would kill a Palestinian on a checkpoint and say, well, a terrorist was neutralized. Let us bring it back to what it means when Israeli leaders and American politicians or Western politicians use this framing of real estate. The first reason for this is that constantly the West looks at the Palestinian issue as one that is just needs some economic prosperity. The second thing is Israel uses this language not as a reflection of the present, but as an attempt to frame the future. So this is something we need to really keep in mind, and why it is so important that Palestinians are emphasizing to call it as it is. Let's call a spade a spade. An occupation is only part of a colonialism.
American media and Western media in general tries to illustrate the case of Al-Aqsa, the case of Jerusalem and Palestinians, as though they're equating it to be a conflict. What they're saying is that a stone is worth a live bullet being shot at you. What they're saying is that a military is the same as unarmed civilians looking around the street for anything, absolutely anything, to defend themselves with, and that is stones. And it is the same vilification and equation that Israel uses in its military courts. Israel will sentence Palestinians up to 10 years for stone throwing. But if a settler goes and shoots at Palestinians and kills Palestinians, at best, they are given community service. So the way media illustrates us as rioters, the way media illustrates us as though we are clashing, these are clashes. It is not clashes. It is people being driven out of their homes. And it is an entire community trying to come together. Even though they can't, there's an apartheid wall separating us. The American scene of coverage on Palestine is one which mirrors the same coverage that we have seen in 2011, in 2012, 2014, 2018, when Gaza is being bombed over and over again, that suddenly the attention becomes the rockets. But when there's a response from a place like Gaza, with Hamas being a militant group, it is so much easier to vilify Palestinians, and suddenly we're everywhere on media, and everyone kind of wants to speak about Gaza, 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 as though Gaza is a sovereign state on its own rather than a Palestinian city that has been besieged for 15 years. Western media continues to negate the reality of Palestinians as people under a colonialism that fragments them geopolitically. What I'm witnessing in Palestine is this rise of a new generation that is building on the efforts also, I think, of previous generations who are critical of the language that is being used in media, and who are saying, you know what? Why are we going to critique? Let's just speak instead. Let us use the language we want to use. Let us say the words we want to say, like apartheid, like colonialism, like occupation, military, repression, and contextualizing the violence. And this is a generation that looks at no faction, that looks at no political leadership except themselves. They look at their own strength, they look at their own courage and their own bravery, because really, truly, it feels like we are at a final breath. And the only way forward from here is to just be so completely ourselves that the only option is for the world to accept us.